Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Mehlman Lecture. We are fortunate to have one of the nation's most respected and intellectually vibrant health law programs, the oldest health law program. Health law sits at the intersection of some of the most consequential questions of our time. How we regulate emerging technologies, how we balance innovation and patient protection, how we address public health challenges, and how law and ethics shape the future of medicine. A major reason for our consistent strength of our health law program over years is really because of the leadership of two extraordinary scholars, Sharona Hoffman and Max Mehlman. Professor Hoffman is widely recognized for her influential work on health law, bioethics, aging, the governance of emerging technologies in medicine, and her scholarship and leadership have really helped to establish us as a national center of thoughtful and forward-looking engagement with the modern challenges of healthcare. Professor Mehlman, it's pretty cool to be a professor and have a lecture series named after you while you're still a professor at the school. So that tells you a little bit about Professor Mehlman's stature. He has been a pioneer in the fields of bioethics and health law. He's explored some of the most fascinating and frankly maybe unsettling questions that can be raised in bioethics, biomedical science, from genetic enhancement to human experimentation. And his work consistently pushes us to think carefully about the ethical boundaries of innovation and the role of law in shaping the course of human healthcare in this country and around the world. So together, Professors Hoffman and Mehlman have really built a program that reflects the very best of legal academia and especially, of course, the very best of this law school. Rigorous scholarship, engagement with real-world policy issues, and a commitment to interdisciplinary collaboration with leaders in medicine, science, public health, bioethics. The Mehlman Lecture really continues that tradition. It brings together distinguished thinkers, our faculty, our community, to explore cutting-edge issues at the intersection of law, medicine, and ethics, issues that will shape healthcare policy for many years to come. It's our pleasure to welcome you to this year's Mehlman Lecture. I'm going to stop speaking and invite Professor Hoffman to introduce our speaker. Again, thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, Dean Rose. I want to add my welcome as well. We are delighted to have with us Michelle Williams as our 2026 Mehlman Lecture presenter. We are grateful to the Pergament family for endowing this lecture series, which began in 2014. It honors, as you just heard, our beloved Professor Max Mehlman, who is the co-director of the Law Medicine Center. And he has led our program for many, many decades, and it's really thanks to him that we remain one of the top health law centers in the country. Unfortunately, Professor Mehlman could not join us today in person for medical reasons, but he is with us on Zoom. I saw him earlier. And now on to our speaker. Michelle Williams is senior counsel at Baker Donelson in Atlanta, Georgia. Previously, she was a commissioner on the Advisory Committee on Childhood Vaccines, which advised the U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services. That would be an interesting job to have right now. She was also a former in-house counsel at University Hospitals of Cleveland and has served other academic medical centers in a similar capacity. Ms. Williams focuses her practice on the regulatory and structuring aspects of hospital mergers, acquisitions, and integrations. Her experience includes obtaining Attorney General and federal approvals for complex transactions, conversion from nonprofit to for-profit status, and issues of successor liability. She represents clients undergoing various government surveys, Medicare terminations, which are unpleasant, and regulatory reviews, and has advised clients on numerous other health law issues. Michelle Williams is an extremely accomplished attorney. Since 2012, she has been recognized by the best lawyers in America in healthcare law, and Chambers USA has listed her as a leading healthcare lawyer since 2008. Her topic today is administrative law and the U.S. trauma system, life on the ledge, and that sounds fascinating, so I will turn it over to our speaker.
Thank you, Professor. I tend to walk around when I speak, but I've been told that if I stray too far, I will make the people that are listening remotely motion sick. So I will walk around a little bit. I am a 1986 grad of Case Western Law School. I came to Case as a medical technologist in my second career. And while I was at Case, I worked at University Hospitals of Cleveland as a medical technologist, weekends and nights. So that allowed me not to be hand to mouth for financing of during law school. When I was third year, UH decided to start a law department. They didn't have a law department before that, and they asked if I would be a lawyer after I graduated. They had Rosemary Macedonio, who is a law grad of the school, was at UH part-time and at the medical school part-time, but they wanted to have a full-time presence, and she came over full-time. And I worked for her out of law school. And it was a great experience, but it's really not the way to do it. So don't do it. After 3 years, I went to be the second lawyer at Mount Sinai Medical Center. Mount Sinai Medical Center is no more. So again, don't follow my example. It closed and I was out of work and we were all laid off. And I ended up in Atlanta at Alston & Bird and went from being a client who everybody wanted to take out to dinner to a third-year associate. But this was really the start of my legal education from a practical perspective, because working at a law firm really gave me the background that I did not have going straight from law school over to UH. Though I loved my time at UH, and there's nothing like being in-house. But, and I have done that since I graduated and since I went to Alston & Bird. Occasionally I go on loan. I've been on loan to Emory as an attorney, to Grady, and to McLeod Regional Medical Center. Usually when they're in trouble. So what we're going to talk about is, how did I get to this? Most of my time now is buying and selling hospitals, regulatory aspects of hospitals. In order to do that, there's a multitude of things that you have to do from a regulatory perspective. But part of my work is as a special attorney general for the state of Georgia to the Georgia Trauma Commission. And I want to thank the Georgia Trauma Commission for helping me with these slides and this presentation. And they really have taught me about the trauma system in the United States, or lack thereof. And we're going to toggle back and forth between law and operations, because I truly feel that if you want to be a good healthcare lawyer, you have to know operationally, how does your client work? You can know all the law in the world, but if you don't know how your client works, it's going to be difficult to advise them. And frankly, most clients don't want to hear about the law. They just want to know, can they do what they want to do? And before I go further, I would be remiss. I want to recognize Anthea Daniel, who is a former Calfee Halter attorney, a former Akron Children's attorney, and a former Baker Donaldson attorney, but not at the same time that I'm at Baker. And I'm at Baker Donaldson. Baker Donaldson is not Baker Hostetler. Baker Donaldson is a 700-person law firm. We have 200 healthcare attorneys. I joined there from Alston & Bird in 2019, right before COVID. And if you had to go through COVID, being at a law firm that had 200 healthcare attorneys was a great opportunity for all of the distress that it caused everyone. I'm in the Atlanta office, so I am below the Mason-Dixon line. When you go down to the Mason-Dixon line, you automatically turn blonde and you stay 29. So even though I graduated in 1986, I'm still 29. So I was appointed as a Special Attorney General to advise the Georgia Trauma Commission, which is an agency of the state. And we're going to talk about essentially a different kind of agency situation than people are usually think of when they think of agencies. Usually people think of agencies as regulatory agencies. The Georgia Trauma Commission is not a regulatory agency. It's still a critically important state agency, but they do not credential trauma centers. They do not license trauma centers. They are a funding mechanism to take state funds from fireworks laws and from appropriations and from superspeeder laws and distribute them among the 35 trauma centers in the state. They're also responsible to elevate the quality of care as much as they can in Georgia as to trauma systems, and we're going to talk about that later. 2 projects that I've done for them. The first was taking their quality program and organizing it into a patient safety organization, which is a organization that is created under the Federal Patient Safety Act of 2005, which gives you protection and privilege for your quality activities. And again, we'll talk about that later. I also worked on all of their contracts. They have contracts with all 35 trauma centers, and we recently revamped all of those contracts to talk about the criteria that a trauma center had to meet in order to receive funding. Okay, so please ask questions as we go. I want to talk about what you want to talk about, not what I think you want to talk about. So what are our goals? I said we're going to talk about operations, but we're also going to talk legal issues. I know this is a CLE, you have to have some law in there. And the framework that we're going to talk about briefly, because this is an overview, is licensure, registration, accreditation, verification, designation, and ranking. Is there anybody that knows, other than Anthea, that knows what all of those things mean? Okay, I can make it up. Trauma is a relatively new modality. When I was growing up, and I just took 1960 as an arbitrary date, we had 8 kids in my family, and we were in the ER all the time. At the time I was growing up, the ER was staffed not by ER physicians because there was no such specialty. It was staffed by rotating specialists, and my mom would call our neighbor, who was our doctor, who lived 5 miles away from us because we lived out in the country, and he would come to the hospital and he would take care of whatever happened to us, and then he would also make house calls. So very much primary care physicians. Specialists would rotate through, and you certainly would have access to the specialists, but there was no such thing as ER physicians until, let's see, the ER physicians started in 1979, emergency medicine was recognized as a specialty. That really is not so far long ago. We really are just through the first generation of ER physicians. And is trauma ER medicine? Luke?
Yes.
Sorry, Olivia? No. It's sort of both, yes and no. But we'll get into that in a minute. So it's a relatively new care modality. There are, for statistics purposes, 6,000 hospitals in the United States, and about 2,000 are trauma centers, and 127 burn centers. So all trauma centers are acute care hospitals, but all acute care hospitals are not trauma centers. And that's the difference that we're going to talk about. I did a little comparison of Georgia and Ohio. I grew up in New York, even though I live now in Georgia. I was very chagrined to find out that Georgia was the largest state east of the Mississippi. I always thought New York was, but it's not. So it's pretty comparable to Ohio in population, 11.9 to 11 million. You all have 66 trauma centers, we have 35 for the same population. You have 8 burn centers, we have 2. 12 adult level 1s and 6 adult in Georgia. So quite a disparity, and we'll talk about that disparity. Administrative law, okay. Briefly, we're talking about health law, and frankly, to me, administrative law, and the administrative law professors may disagree with me. I think it's regulatory law, agency law. That's what I practice. And in health law, you have hospital law. I am a hospital lawyer. I do not do anything other than hospitals. But there are many different kinds of hospitals. We're going to be talking about acute care hospitals and a specific subset of acute care hospitals, trauma and burn centers. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we're talking about patient care and quality of care law, because that's what we're all here for. Okay, here's everything you need to know about administrative law. You have a statute, federal or state. You have an agency that promulgates regulations. The agency also promulgates a manual and policies, and then they survey whoever they are in charge of regulating. If you take Medicare as an example, there's the Medicare statute. They have the conditions of participation. That's the rules, regulations of Medicare. If you want to participate in Medicare as a hospital, you have to abide by them. They have hundreds of manuals, thousands of policies, court cases, but at the end of the day, they have surveys. And this is how my clients get in trouble, or how they call me, is that there is a survey and something bad happened. So we talked a little bit about this. There are regulatory agencies and non-regulatory agencies. So the Georgia Trauma Commission is a non-regulatory agency. It does not give out licenses. It doesn't give out designations. It funds and it elevates the quality of care. If you want to talk about a life cycle of administrative law and an adverse action, you have a survey and a manual. You can put me in front of any agency, and if I have their manual, and if I have a survey, meaning an inspection report of my client, I can get them through whatever administrative action they are undergoing. And I will tell you that the manuals, in many times, are aspirational. They don't reflect the law. Oftentimes, they are the agency's interpretation of the law and how they want things to happen or things to be. But if you run afoul of the agency, there's going to be consequences. You can have a Medicare termination, and I think, Sharona, you said something about Medicare termination. That is not, if you get a letter terminating your Medicare, that is not career enhancing for a CEO. And it's how I get on their speed dial. You have funding losses, you have fines, licensure loss, reputational problems. There is in ER law, there is an ER life, there is a ER bad boy list for anyone who violates the patient anti-dumping law. Anyone know what that is, other than Sharona and Anthea? Okay, it's a law that says if a patient comes to your ER, you must screen them to see if they have an emergency medical condition, and you must stabilize them. And if you can't stabilize them, you have to transfer them. It's an unfunded mandate, so if they don't have any money, you still have to do it. So it has had catastrophic financial implications for hospitals, but it is a good thing from a community perspective. Okay, just talking for a minute, my life is not with other lawyers. Okay, so you have any litigators here? Litigators are going to talk mostly with other litigators in their cases. If you're a corporate lawyer, you're going to be talking to other corporate lawyers. I talk with agency personnel. Agency personnel guide my practice. And it's a lot different than talking to a lawyer. And a lot of times I'm behind the scenes. I might write the email, I might write the refutation, I might write the appeal, but it's the client that will deliver it, and I stay in the background. But you really only have lawyers at the beginning when they write the regulations, and then at the end of a process, if you end up in front of an ALJ. But I will tell you, most clients, when they're in trouble, don't want to end up in front of an ALJ. It's quite expensive. So there's lots of things that happen in order to avoid that. But now you don't have to take administrative law if you're a law student. Okay, what are we going to talk about for going back now to operations? What is a trauma injury? It's a public health epidemic within the United States. I completely agree with that. The second definition, really what it's saying is it's multi-system. You have not just a broken leg. You have a broken leg, you have a crushed pelvis, you have breathing issues. So it's multi-organ affected. And if you are in the American College of Surgeons that we're going to talk about in a minute, trauma is a surgical disease requiring surgical leadership. So what is a trauma injury? It's not a broken leg. If you have a uncomplicated broken leg, even if it needs surgery, that's not a trauma. What we're talking about is major burns, serious falls off, you're on the roof, fall off, severe car crashes, mass casualty events, explosions, traumatic brain injuries, okay? So things on the right are things that you would go to an ER for, but a trauma patient spends maybe 6% of time spent in the ER is on trauma, because the trauma wants to be moved to where they are going to get more definitive care. I'm not going to go through these statistics. If you want statistics, CDC Whiskers, everybody has to have a cute name. So Whiskers has all sorts of information, and I know you probably can't see this. This is another Whiskers slide. Trauma is sometimes can be a little hard to define. This is unintentional injury, which can or cannot be considered trauma. Here they have poisoning as a big unintended injury calculation. I wouldn't call it pure trauma, but this is overdoses. These are poisonings. These are overdoses. This is the fentanyl epidemic. And then you have motor vehicle accidents. Okay, this is really the only thing you really need to know. It's the leading cause of death for people aged 1 to 44. I would say that's 90% of the people in this audience, leading number one cause of death. And the major preventative death is bleeding out. So those are the things that people in the trauma field are going to focus on. And for every death from trauma, you have 3 severely injured people. So what's the outcome of having 3 disabled people from trauma? What subset of health law is going to be associated with these people, these survivors? Rehabilitation. In my office, we have lawyers that focus just on EMS, lawyers that focus on rehabilitation hospitals. Okay, this is the trauma system. We're going to talk about trauma centers and trauma systems, but this is the trauma system. It starts with prevention, okay? It ends with somebody walking out of the trauma center. But these are the usual stages. And you have to think of trauma as a scope, as an interconnected system. Now, when I look at this slide, what do you see from a regulatory perspective? You see things about smoke alarms and fire extinguishers. And who manages or regulates that? That's going to be your state fire marshal. When you get to scene care or ambulances in the pre-hospital and the transport, who is that? Who's going to regulate that? That's going to be your departments of health, your motor vehicles. If you're in a medevac, it's going to be the FAA. Then you get to hospitals, which is a whole different set of regulations. Hospital licensure. Hospital licensure is not the same thing as ambulance licensure. And then you do a trauma center, which is a special type of acute care hospital. Hopefully you get out of the trauma center and you're in maybe a long-term care acute hospital, long-term acute care hospital, rehabilitation hospital, and outpatient. So when I see this and I look at all the pieces, these are inconsistent, overlapping, interconnected laws. So for instance, in Georgia, you have an ambulance law that says when somebody picks up a patient, they have to go to the nearest hospital. Okay, well, the nearest hospital may not be the best hospital. Where do you want to go? You want to end up at the hospital of definitive care. Where can you get your definitive care? We have across this country people that might go to 1, 2, or 3 hospitals before they get to their definitive care. And so you might go, if you can't breathe or you have a circulation problem, you're bleeding, you may need to go to a non-trauma center, but hopefully you can get packaged up and transferred to a trauma center. So this, to me, when I look at it from a regulatory perspective, is you've got a lot of regulatory agencies. They're all different agencies. They all regulate different things. They all have their own turf. And Eric, was it Eric? They all, sorry? Andrew, I wasn't even close. They all have what? Their own?
Surveys and manuals.
Their own surveys and manuals. Okay, very good. Okay, why does the functional trauma system matter? Okay, this is a picture of an 18-year-old who spun out on his motorcycle, high school senior. The picture that you see below, the second picture where the tanker truck is, the tanker truck did not hit him. Okay, he spun out, the tanker truck did not hit him, but the pickup truck did. There was a work truck that had cameras in the front and the back, and so the camera with the pickup truck was not able to avoid him. It happened right in front of him, so he spun out and then he was run over. But this is a success story. The truck driver stops, the pickup truck driver stops. I think the gas truck stopped too. So we have bystanders, okay? Bystanders start the chain, call 911, we get EMS there, and they transport the child to a level 2 trauma center. And within 32 minutes, he was in the OR. So he survived his injuries. Now, definitely has sequelae after that. You can't go through something like that. But he graduated, didn't go to his graduation, but he did, and go to college in the fall. That is an optimal case. Everything worked. So where did he go? Do I keep punching this, I guess? Where are my pictures? Oh. Okay. He went to a trauma bay, okay? And a trauma bay is, you can't really tell. This is not his picture, and you can't identify the patients. This is actually a 3-person trauma bay. There are 2 patients there, and it is a choreographed dance, just like a pit crew. And on the left side are all of the specialties that could be in that room or on call for that room. And it's quite amazing. When I was a med tech, we would have to go to the trauma bay when a code was called and get blood so we can do a type and cross match for a blood bank. Or if we didn't have time for that, we would bring down O-negative blood. So what's the goal? Here's a trauma bay afterward. You want rapid resuscitation. You want to get to the OR or to the ICU as soon as you can. Okay. So why is the functional trauma system important? It lowers the risk of death 25% compared to non-trauma center treatment. And we have more people now surviving traumatic injuries than ever before, which is a good thing. And this is just a financial picture. What happens when people survive trauma or can go back to work? From a state perspective, you have more taxes. You have more people who are able to contribute into the economy. So it's an economic issue for states also. So let me stop there for a minute, because you're all being so quiet. Does anybody have any questions so far? You can make one up. This is like church.
I have a quick question. I think I heard the clinic is trying to open a new trauma center. I know we have one. Oh, thank you.
The Cleveland Clinic?
Yeah, I thought I read or heard something that the Cleveland Clinic is venturing down the path of opening a new trauma center. And I saw from the other slide, we have quite a few in Ohio compared to Georgia. What are some of the considerations whether or not a trauma center is needed? And, what are the things you need to consider with regards to geography and other things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for every 3 people that you ask, you'll have 4 different answers. In states with a certificate of need law, like Georgia, and I think, does Ohio? We don't have it anymore?
That limitation, just nursing homes.
Oh, okay. So we have certificate of need. So certificate of need process, again, another regulatory agency. You have to have a manual and a survey, thank you. And they do a lot of demographic information, generate a lot of demographic information, and your application is going to be like this when you apply, and you're going to have to show need. Other states don't have that. I think about 35 states have certificate of need. But there are metrics, and there's actually been some discussion in the literature about not putting trauma centers everywhere. I think that's misguided, but you know, I'm a lawyer, you know, what do I know? And we are going to get to how you get to be a trauma center. So a trauma center defined is a specialized hospital facility, has immediate availability of specialized surgeons and equipment on a 24-hour basis. It's a component of a trauma system. Now, I can give you a number of how many trauma centers there are in the country. I cannot give you a number of how many trauma systems there are. Remember, the system is from prevention all the way to outpatient. There is no good data on how many systems we have. Other countries have been able to do that, but everybody does it differently. We have 50 different states. There is no national trauma regime, if you will. So the acute care hospital wants to be, so we have, you know, Mehlman Medical Center, Cleveland Clinic. Mehlman Medical Center wants to be a trauma center. So first they have to be an acute care hospital, licensed by the state. Generally they're going to be Medicare participating. If you are not Medicare participating, you probably cannot survive. And things like payer mix, which is how many Medicare and Medicaid patients you have versus private patients, is an important metric for hospitals. I have hospitals that have 95 public pay and 5% private pay. Those are your safety net hospitals. Have some wealthier hospitals that might only have 20% public pay. So they have to be Medicare and Medicaid participating. It would be hard to be a trauma center without it. And you would have to follow the Medicare ER, emergency services, conditions of participation, and the Medicare EMTALA conditions of participation. And what does that entail?
Survey and manual.
Yeah, manual and then a survey. Right, got it. And generally hospitals are ranked. And to be a trauma center, we don't have a national regulation, national way to do it. This is private regulation, and it's called verification. Verification is really private regulation, and verification is a process conducted by the American College of Surgeons. They are not a regulatory agency. But if you want to be a trauma center, you need to go through the manual survey process of the American College of Surgeons. There's no Medicare condition of participation for trauma. You know, I'm not advocating that there be one, but there isn't one. Okay. And if you think that these designations, rankings are not important, just look at any hospital website and they are going to give you chapter and verse on their accreditations, their designations, their registrations, whatever. So here's UH, and they're telling you that they are a Medicare participating hospital, and they have just a second word, survey. They are also accredited by DNV, and they have that says annual visits from DNV surveyors, which is a survey, and that evaluates patient care. The Ohio Department of Health will give them a license, and they conduct on-site surveys. So, trying not to get too much in the weeds, you can avoid Medicare doing a survey or the Ohio Department of Health from doing a survey if you are deemed compliant by one of these accreditation agencies like DNV or the Joint Commission. Okay, that's a whole different layer, but most of the time you don't have CMS coming out to do a survey or the Ohio Department of Health. Mostly you are surveyed through these accreditation agencies. Now, and here's UH, they're letting you know that they have trauma center at 7 locations ratings. I'm not really sure what they mean by that, but I think they mean verification by the American College of Surgeons. Okay, and if you think these ratings are not important, this is a recent case, like on the 14th of March. Leapfrog is an agency, nonprofit corporation. It's not a governmental agency, and they rank hospital quality. And they ranked or failed to rank some hospitals in Florida, and this is how consumers can find out information about hospitals. The Leapfrog ranking is sacrosanct for these hospitals, and so the hospitals said their ranking is wrong, incorrectly, they were inaccurate, and they sued. So I don't know what's going to happen there. So we're going to talk about verification. Again, what we're really talking about are non-governmental agencies exerting regulatory authority, if you will, over our hospitals. So the American College of Surgeons, which I totally support, I think they do an amazing job. It's a nonprofit corporation. It sets standards, and these are voluntary standards. You do not have to be a trauma center. So you have to raise your hand and say, I, the Cleveland Clinic, I, Mehlman Medical Center, want to be a trauma center. So you make an application to the American College of Surgeons. They publish a manual. They will then survey you and determine through their verification, review, and consultation process, are you up to speed to be a trauma center, to have the designation of a trauma center. And what the American College of Surgeons also does is they rank hospitals, trauma centers, into levels 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 is the most complex and the highest level. Okay. Now, their manual is very clear that these standards are not standards of care. So for the plaintiff's lawyers, what they're essentially saying is these standards are basically an evaluation of the resources that a hospital has to determine if they match the resources that are needed to be a trauma center. They're not standard of care. I don't know. I'm not a plaintiff's lawyer, but have to see. So standard is used in this manual is defined as a qualification for verification, not a standard of care. Okay, so what are the levels? Level 1 trauma center is the most comprehensive. And they are, remember we had that slide where we showed all of the, from prevention to pre-hospital to hospital to trauma center. They are really supposed to take the lead in trauma system development. So they have to work with all of their stakeholders in the trauma system. If you're a level 1, you do disaster planning and you do education and research. So most of the level 1s, not all of them, are academic medical centers, but not all of them. Level 2 has to provide definitive care for a wide range of injuries. Level 3, basically package and go. Get there, stabilize, package them up, and get them out. You transfer up a chain, you're not transferring down a chain, though there are always exceptions to that. So what is Mehlman Medical Center going to have to do to get level 1 trauma center verification in their survey? They're going to have to show that the board has approved establishing itself as a trauma center. So you're going to have a board resolution, meeting minutes, something tangible that you can put in your application packet. You have to commit to having the necessary personnel, facilities, and equipment. You have to agree that you're going to help other levels, the level 2s, the levels 3s. In Georgia, we have levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. In Ohio, you have levels 1, 2, and 3. You don't have 4 and 5. We don't have 5. You don't have 4 and 5. You have to have a comprehensive quality assessment program. And in your personnel, you have got to have a trauma medical director, a trauma program director, trauma nurses, a trauma registrar, and trauma surgeons. So, trauma data. Trauma data, every trauma center maintains a trauma registry. So every trauma that comes in is going to be, metriced from stem to stern. And they keep that trauma registry. Hospitals have all sorts of registries. They have cancer registries, they have pediatric registries, all sorts of registries. This is not a registry that you can go in and get information out of. Now, they might have some research. You might be able to request to do some research on it, but it's not an open registry like you can go and get the information like you could for, say, other types of registry that the state may maintain. The National Trauma Data Bank is maintained by the American College of Surgeons, that private nonprofit corporation that we were talking about. And they will collect the information from each trauma center, package it, and put it back to them in comparative form. Okay, these are some of the audit filters that the data that they're going to collect. They're going to collect delay in response, delay in recognition of missed injuries, unanticipated return to OR, unanticipated transfer to the ICU, delays or adverse events, among other things, delay in access to time-sensitive diagnostic or therapeutic intervention, delay in response to the ICU. Okay, I can go on, but what do they all have in common?
Adverse events.
Adverse events. Adverse events. But, and is that something any hospital is going to want its competitors or the public to know about? No. But why is it important? Okay? This data bank, this collection of data is critically important because if you are going to improve quality of care, you have to have all the stakeholders talk about their mistakes, and you have to do it up and down the chain. You have to have candid conversations. And candid conversations, in my opinion, deserve privilege. Okay? We have that at the state level. We have 50 state peer review statutes which let hospitals internally talk about bad events, and that's protected from discovery. Plaintiffs' lawyers can't get that. But that's not enough. If you want to elevate a trauma system, everybody in the chain has to show their dirty laundry. And that's one of the things that I've been doing with the Georgia Trauma Commission, is trying to put that information in a patient safety organization. Patient safety organizations are the only national privilege, if you will, because there is a privilege. If you participate in a patient safety organization or are registered as a patient safety organization, you can rely on a privilege to keep that information out of the hands of people who are not interested in quality. But it also goes back to, we don't have a national infrastructure for trauma systems. Zero, zilch. So these are some of the data use issues. We have open records laws. Some of our hospitals are quasi-governmental. They're authority hospitals, and they are subject to open records. Well, what are you going to do if you get an open records request for trauma registry information or your adverse events? Okay, what will happen? That will chill your candid discussions. You're not going to know when something bad happened and it happened at the EMS level, but you found it at the hospital. Those people have to talk, candid discussions. Okay. There's somewhat of a self-evaluative national privilege, pretty meager, pretty thin. There's some quality assurance privilege, again, pretty thin. So you really need to be cautious about what you're collecting and who has it. So a lot of times when I work with the Trauma Commission, they're like, we don't want that information. So there's no patient identifiable information in anything that the Trauma Commission, because they are state agency and subject to open records, we don't want that, so don't give it to us. So trauma centers are islands of excellence in a sea of chaos. So trauma care has changed the regulatory environment. Now we're at the bleeding edge. You know, as I said, there are trauma bays in the ED, but a typical trauma patient only spends 6% of their time in the ED. This is not an ED-oriented care. There's resuscitation rooms. If you're a level 1 trauma center, you have to have a dedicated 24/7 open OR. Okay, so my client, Grady, you know, they've got elective surgeries, but they've also got hot surgeries at appendix. Okay, if there's 3 car wreck victims in the, you know, neurosurgery, getting neurosurgery in the ORs, well, you don't have room for your appendix. The same thing as if you have your appendix in the surgery, what do you do with your 3 3 head injuries? And so not everybody can do this, but this, you know, Grady has now separated their trauma surgeries from their other surgeries. So they're 2 separate buildings. It's expensive. We now have point of care testing. Okay, when I was a med tech, the samples would come up to the lab, we would do them, we would send the results down. Well, now they're in the trauma bay, the med techs. The ambulance have changed. We now have pre-hospital blood being administered. You know, it makes me cringe. I'm just like, what? You know, meaning a med tech is not in charge of the blood? That's, you know, blows my little mind. So, in 1960, that's a 1960 ambulance. Now we have CAT scanners in ambulance. Now I will tell you, most CAT scanners, ambulances are not going out to traumas. This is for the stroke patients. But I'm a regulatory lawyer and I'm like, oh my God, is that a hospital radiology? Is that outpatient? You know, what is it? And these are the kinds of things as the technology advances that the CWRU law school class will get to handle, and I don't have to handle it. Trauma systems are expensive. Remember we said they're voluntary? You don't have to be a trauma center. In some cases, some states, in Mississippi, it's my understanding, you either have to be a trauma center, or if you are not a trauma center, you pay into a pot that gives money to the trauma centers. We've already said there's no national trauma system infrastructure or funding for readiness or uncompensated care. Insufficient governmental funding. Yes, if you have insurance, your insurance will pay for your care. But it's not going to pay to keep the OR open 24/7. Yes, there is an activation fee, trauma activation fee. I don't know why that says seed, it should be fee. And payer contracts, it comes up in payer contracts. Everybody wants to have a pediatric hospital in their network. Everybody wants to have a trauma center in their network. They may only want you to go to a trauma 2. They may not want you to go to a trauma 1. So there's all sorts of this payer negotiations. Readiness costs. I'm not sure. That? There. Okay. These are old, relatively old statistics because it's hard to get statistics. But remember I said that Georgia Trauma Commission funds trauma centers. It's a drop in the bucket. Are they funding care? No. What they are funding is the readiness cost. What does it cost to keep your surgeon 24/7 or surgeons? What does it cost to keep your OR open with your OR team available? That's just the readiness cost. It's $10 million between 2016 and 2019. If the Mehlman Medical Center wants to become a trauma center, they're going to have to cough up a lot of money for this. That is uncompensated. The uncompensated care is for people that don't have insurance. And if you're a level 1, you have to do education and outreach. Okay. Now we have 2 problems. We have an access problem. We also have a saturation problem. When I first started, this is just a headline, can a busy ER handle the hardest cases? Obviously, this is no for this author. But all of this has created a new language and new regulatory things that we have to do as healthcare lawyers. When I first started in healthcare law, hospitals would calculate length of stay, LOS, and they would know their length of stay every day. And that was just for the inpatients. And Dr. Duncan Newhouser, who was an advisor to Health Matrix, who Max knows, he was a professor in the business school. And if he wanted to know how hospitals were doing in Cleveland, he would drive around in his car around dinner time and check to see how many hospital rooms were lit at each of the hospitals. And that's a pretty darn good way to know what your census is, your length of stay. Then we started to get length of stay in the ED. Now we have wall time. And each of these things that I'm talking about has a set of regulations on which are in a
Manual.
and which hospitals are surveyed. So we had wall time. You know, all these new words, new terms. Wall time is how long does it take for an ambulance to get their patient in the hands of a nurse in the ED? And it can be a long time. The most recent regulations just came out, I haven't even read them, that there are emergency care access timelines in the new Medicare conditions of participation. We have corridor care. Last time my husband went to the ED, which was last year, for he tore his patella in half. He never got to an ED room, ever. We walked in and it was just packed. And he had corridor care. Everything was done in the corridor. We have boarders. Boarders are now a thing. Boarders are people that you know are going to go into the inpatient setting, into an inpatient bed, but they don't have a bed. There's no bed. So they'll board days, week. If you're a psychiatric patient, you could be there a long time. And one boarded patient increases the ED length of stay 12 minutes for all patients. And then you have the issue of diversion, okay? You're packed to the gills, your ICU is at 106%, you can't take any more ambulances, what do? The hospital puts out a notice, we are on diversion, ambulances do not come here. Does that stop private vehicles? No, just the ambulances. Well, where are they going to go? So then they've got to find another hospital to go to. I spend whole days on diversion issues. How do we handle this saturation? I have clients who have lawyers on what are called patient throughput committees. And these lawyers sit there and they bring up cases. Social work is there, nursing is there, medical director's there, the lawyer's there, and they bring, once a week, bring the list of all the patients that are ready to go that they can't get out of the hospital. And so, you know, the lawyer, they ask the lawyer, can we evict them? Can we get a guardianship? Can we do a bed reservation agreement where hospital pays a nursing home to take the patient? Because it's going to be cheaper to pay the nursing home to take the patient than to keep the patient in the bed. It's a big problem. And I represent tiny hospitals, 25 beds or less, and I represent big hospitals. So the tiny hospitals are calling me saying, how can I get my patients into Mehlman Medical Center? And then Mehlman Medical Center is calling me, how can I keep this non-trauma out of my ED? That's not, they can treat a broken leg. They don't need to send it to us because we are not a rationalized system of patients. Okay. This is what the nuns say for my Catholic hospitals. No money, no mission. Okay? And when they have no money, then they start to cry, and it's sad. Trauma centers can generate revenue if financial support is provided. Now, the Georgia Trauma Commission, and I'm sure other states, are providing some financial support, but not enough. More importantly, they can provide better outcomes for injured patients by reducing what's length of stay, LOS, reduce the length of stay and mortality compared with trauma treatment at a non-trauma center. Hospitals are making cuts after the big beautiful bill. It's going to affect emergency departments. Supposedly 7.5 million people are now going to be uninsured. Is that going to stop them from being trauma victims and coming to a trauma center or non-trauma center? No. Okay. We have trauma deserts now. So this goes to your point that you raised about Mehlman Medical Center. Do we need a new trauma center? I would never give up a trauma center, and I would say yes. But we have trauma deserts. Anybody here a snowbird? Their parents are snowbirds? Okay, I see some people nodding their head. If they go down I-75, once they leave Atlanta, there are no trauma centers, no level 1 trauma centers until they hit Florida. If you are in a car wreck there, you're going to go to a critical access hospital with 25 beds, and the only thing they're going to do is be able to package you up and ship you out. There are no level 1 trauma centers. We have, what that's doing, okay. Becker's, 21 hospitals gained and lost trauma centers designations. Anybody here from Dayton? Dayton lost 2 trauma centers in 2024. Anybody here from Dublin, Ohio? They gained 1. Okay, we have ambulance deserts. We still have volunteer ambulances. We have counties that have no ambulances. We have counties that may have 2 ambulances. They may have 1 ambulance. If that 1 ambulance has to take a patient from, the middle of South Georgia up to Atlanta, that leaves the county bare. They don't have, that's it, you're done. You don't have another ambulance. We have healthcare shortage areas. We have pharmacy deserts now. We have maternity deserts, as well as trauma deserts. We have broadband deserts. Can you imagine trying to operate a hospital without broadband? Bad news. Okay. Any questions before I finish? And I realize I'm 5 minutes over. I'll try to just go 1 more minute. Okay, very quiet. Okay, this is Max. and I don't know if I can read it from here. Max in 1992. A public health program that is based on medical need will not achieve redistributive justice objectives through its eligibility criteria and average coverage policies, but instead through its financing and payment mechanisms. This is no money, no mission. So these programs should be designed to provide designed to provide critical and often life-saving services to persons when they are weak and vulnerable. They should not be a source of frustration and despair, but a source of aid and comfort. Yeah. Wonderful words from a wonderful man. It's not any different now. It shouldn't take luck to stay healthy in Georgia. This is a recent, 2026. It's the luck of the draw. Are you in, South Georgia, in Vidalia, in the middle of the onion fields with a 100-bed hospital, and you have a car wreck or a farm equipment wreck? Okay. Help is not on the way. What is needed? I think people need to become familiar with trauma system law as lawyers. I think trauma prevention and trauma systems should become considered essential services. I think there should be a national funding. I do not understand, with all the money that we spend on DOT, infrastructure, and roads, if you took 0.1% of every contract and gave it to the trauma centers, think how much that would be. That could alleviate a lot of this trauma desert. I think we should mesh the military hospitals and the civilian trauma systems. That makes everybody's head explode. But where does most of the trauma care and law come from? Comes from the military through wars. All of these things, battlefield blood, ambulances, mechanized ambulances, it's all from the military. They know how to do this stuff. Then hug a trauma nurse and a trauma surgeon. So what should the CWR class of 2026 focus on? Data, data, data. We now have drones, which is another source of data. We have registries, cybersecurity. We used to have, mostly in COVID, a lot of times the communities would set up ER command centers. And so the patients were distributed equally. A lot of those have fallen away, and you don't have good command centers, transfer centers. Recently, in the UK, a surgeon did telesurgery on a patient in Gibraltar. Now, most robotic surgery, the surgeon is close by, in the hospital or in the suite. This is trans-Mediterranean or transatlantic. I don't know what it is. My geography is not that good, but it's far away. I don't know any trauma surgeons that are doing it, but they probably will in the future. Research. How do you do research on somebody who's in a car crash and comes into your facility unconscious? And there's so much research, you really can't get informed consent. Artificial intelligence. Where is my? Oh yeah, I saw this. I admit it. A boomer. New AIS app is the Swiss Army knife for trauma data professionals. I have no idea what the AIS app is, and I'm scared to think about it. Here's another one. This is recent. AI-enabled forecasting of pre-hospital transfusion needs in patients with trauma, a multinational registry-based retrospective machine learning development and validation study. This is going to keep lawyers busy for a long time. And then things that I haven't thought of. So we have one last, drones. You know, drones, the regulation on that, again, is all over the place, but it's generally line of sight. If you have the drone and you have line of sight, you can take the drone and do whatever you have to do. Well, now we have drones as first responder. Okay, sounds great. Love to have the drones help out, these stretched ambulances. But, you know, this drone now can go over my backyard, can look in my window. I don't know, good thing, bad thing. This speech is dedicated to June McCarroll. She was a nurse and a physician, and she was in a motor vehicle accident in 1917 where a truck drove her Model T into a ditch. And she thought, you know, if I could paint a white line down the middle of the road, and maybe the truck would stay on one side and I could stay on another. And she went to the county commission, and the county commission said, no, we're not going to do that. So she started a letter writing campaign, and in 1924, California DOT adopted her idea. Oh, wait a minute. Wait, can we go back one?
Back a slide.
To the picture of Dr. McCarroll. There she is. Okay. So get your paintbrushes out, figure out what you're going to think about, and be like Dr. McCarroll. Okay, now you can do, this is the way I want trauma bays to look like. See if we can do this. I want them to be empty. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience, and I appreciate it.